have a bit of a confession as I start this week's podcast. When I began this podcast, I did it with the idea in mind of introducing the viewer to the most amazing thing in the world, and that's grace. God's amazing, unearned, undeserved love for us. But I don't always do as good of a job as I should inviting you, the viewer, into that relationship. We're going to fix that this week. This week's episode is an invitation. Welcome to this week's episode of Seeking Proof, Finding Grace. I'm your host, Ron Campbell, and, normally every week I start the podcast off by reminding you of the most important truth in the entire universe. God loves you. But this week is a little bit different. This weekend is Easter Sunday. And this week, more than any other week of the year, we celebrate that victory of the resurrection. You know, we did 3 podcasts on the resurrection. I think it's podcasts 8, 9, and 10. And if you have questions about the resurrection in detail, I would encourage you to consult those podcasts. In all of this, I think it's important to remember that God is not just the apologetics. God is not just the answers to difficult questions. God is not all of these different things. That's not who God is. You know, in the second episode, I introduced you to who God was. And God is that loving Father waiting for the prodigal son to return. God is there waiting for us to return. That we're the prodigal son. We're the ones He's waiting for to come home. And while apologetics is important, and as these podcasts that we've gone through are important, looking at various facts as it relates to building a foundation of our relationship with God in the first 13 episodes, and now as we start working on this question of were we created or are we simply just the product of matter, time, and chance, as we start looking at these things, that's not who God is. And I know we're doing that to establish whether or not we were created or whether or not we evolved. And ultimately, then we need to ask the question, if there is a creator, who was that creator? But this time of year, I think it's important to provide an invitation. You know, if you're in a different place, if you're in a spot where you're a skeptic and you still don't believe any of it, that's one thing, and we're working on that, and we'll keep looking at that in the episodes to come. But if you're at a place where you feel like God's calling you, if you're at a place where you're just searching for answers and you're ready to make a change, you're ready to step into relationship with God, I've mentioned before, you don't have to answer every single question before you step into relationship. In any relationship, you don't answer every single question you have about the person before you enter into relationship with them. If you did, you'd never make it into relationship with them. There's an infinite number of questions you could ask. But if you're ready, there's no better time than now. This weekend at church, you're going to find a message focusing on the resurrection. And the resurrection is a story of God's great love for you. There's no better time to start a relationship with God. And starting a relationship is always the hard part. After that, everything always gets easier. Take that first step this weekend. I want to invite you to church. If you happen to live somewhere near Topeka, Kansas, this invitation is directly to you. We'd love to see you in person, Eastside Baptist Church. You can find us online at esbcks.org. Our service will be Sunday morning, this Sunday at 10 o'clock. We'd love to have you there in person. And if you're not in Topeka, find a good local church somewhere near you. It's important to find a group of fellow believers who are in the same place you are, who are growing in their relationship with God, and who you can have that fellowship with, that sense of community as you go forward. You can find lots of good stuff online. Obviously, our podcast is online. I'd love to have you here every week with us. But you ought to be in a local church, and I would encourage you to find one. But like I said, this week more than any other, I'm inviting you to church. I'd love it if you'd accept that invitation. And as always, I'd love it if you would join us every week here on Seeking Proof, Finding Grace. If you've got questions, you can reach out to us on our website at prooftograce.com. You can find us via email at prooftograce@yahoo.com. But if you've got questions this weekend, step out and take them to your local church and see if you can't find some great answers. You can also find our podcasts on Spotify and iTunes. And we'd love it if you subscribed to this podcast. If you click that follow button and the like button, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Next week, we're going to jump back into the question of, were we created, or are we simply a cosmic accident? But this week, I just wanted to invite you, come to church this weekend. Step out of your comfort zone and make this weekend the weekend that you start a relationship that will change your life forever. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.